Here I'm over on an interior wall, or at least it seems like an interior wall. Obviously it can't be, but it may be on that central tower. And here, one of the elaborate side chapels built by and paid for by the nobles who wanted to lock in their position next to God. Each of these chapels has its own exquisite and beautiful light, in the sense of versus dark feeling to it. Here's still a third chapel, and I must be misorientated because I think these chapels are around behind the altar, behind the choir. Here's just an interesting carving piece that I have not seen before as a centerpiece in a chapel. But how can chapels like this and the iconography and statues and stained glass and stuff that they have inside of them dedicated to an individual not be icons for worship? That is one of the great frauds, in my opinion. In another sense of the airiness and the height of this Gothic structure. Notice the reflection there from the glass above us that we can't see. And even there, glass further on. Everywhere is the sense of glass. Now look at the setup of this chapel. Pretty, for sure, simulating the arches, but still the foundation as a literal construction element. And then with that statue of, I presume, Mary, or it's actually Mother Teresa, or Saint Teresa. Is this not an icon? Is there some other purpose than for people to come and kneel there and worship that icon? This is a pretty set of windows, again illustrating the flowers, the natural. And there we can see that there are 3 icons above that. So at last this makes more sense for what Steve was talking about. Here, very definitely floral designs, only floral designs, and simply designs, no context other than that. And at the top, the 3 medallions, and we'll get a closer look at those. Maybe on a bigger screen we can make out what's going on. Now I'll pan this briefly so you can see what Steve meant about the dominance of blue on this side versus the other. Let me switch now to the other side. Notice still blue is evident, but not as dominating. And I'm not sure dominating is even a good word. Just a greater presence of blue on the other side than here. I slowly pan down the nave. You can see that on the right side, it's a much darker sense in the stained glass. Just artistically so. Or it's much brighter, whiter, lighter on the left side. That's what Steve must have been talking about. Is this lady embroidering, perhaps? And are they just surrounded by plants? Is that the theme? Just to give us a sense of the non-blue side, one complete panel. And look at the difference here between the small detail of plants here, although there are some faces peeking out of those plants, I believe, to what's next door. Much bigger plants. Presumably these light windows on the right illustrating biblical characters after Christ, and those windows on the left illustrating those biblical characters before Christ are designed to come together here, where apparently the rose window is symbolic or has a lot of content relating to Jesus. In other words, he's the focal point in the history of the transition from the Old Testament to the New. This sarcophagus is interesting because it's had a hole knocked in the side of it, number one, but it looks like the supports, two lions, and it's designed to hold either a much bigger one or two, or other kinds of detail, architectural detail. I thought this door lock mechanism was interesting. This thing pushes into that slot, or at least it once did, and the key locks both these things in place. This is an interesting shot because that rose window is actually reflected in these glass doors. And then what you see then through the glass doors is the far end of the cathedral. To the museum, it gives you an idea of how ornate this cloister is. How did they justify it? That would be the north rose window that we're looking at there. Not that I can ever reconcile what I've said inside the church. Certainly all these arches would have been painted. But how do they justify all that went into this? I mean, why so big? Why so grandiose? Why so elegant? Here's a close-up apparently of one of the spires that used to be on one of the towers. An old rose window frame. Somebody must have realized at some time that this was an incredible consumption of the people's resources, that a mitigation of the size, the elegance, the cost of this monument would have alleviated the pain and suffering and deprivations of the poor. I don't know how recent this faded drawing is, nor what probably was a clock, and maybe it was the earlier version of what we saw on the front that's still active. Here's what looks like the newer clock, and it still looks pretty old. And there's the gap, again, between the towers and the central area where all the stained glass is. And that gap designed, as it is on the other side, to provide more light to those magnificent stained glass panels.